This is a Dreamcast disc and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers.
Dreamcast, up to 6 billion players.
Welcome back to the stage of history.
Why don't we play together?
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Please stop this disc now.
Hello and welcome once again to the DreamPod from the Dreamcast Junkyard. Today we're going to deviate ever so slightly from the crib sheet and talk more broadly about Sega and not just the Dreamcast, as we have two very special guests joining us. All will become clear in just a few moments. But basically, if you'd like to listen to a group of 40-year-old blokes talk about distant childhood memories, then boy have we got the show for you. But first, who am I? Well, I'm Tom, and on this episode I'm joined by one of my regular, or should that be irregular, co-hosts. His name is James Jaz Harvey. Hi, Jaz.
Can I just say, I'm not actually 40, Tom. I mean, you've done me a massive disservice there. I'm 39, so I've still got 12 months to go before I have to succumb to that tag. Thanks very much.
Well, you're getting up there, we're all getting up there in age, so it's creaking knees and creaking backs,
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm calling you Jaz anyway to avoid confusion. And
that's fine.
Yes, that's because it's time to introduce our very special guests, one of whom is also called James. James, also known as the SEGAHolic. Welcome to the DreamPod.
Hello, guys. How are you? Thanks very much for having us on.
No, it's a pleasure. It's great to finally speak to you or converse with you, vocally. That's how people usually converse, isn't it? Right, well, no double act would be complete without the more handsome, intelligent and more charismatic partner. So we'd also like to welcome Dan, the Mega Driver. Welcome, Dan.
Hello there. Great to be on. And similar to Jaz, I'm also going to take umbrage at the 40-year-old mark. I'm just 39 myself. So that aside, it's great to be on.
So it's just us then, Tom, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah. It's just those two old gits.
We're basically the true grumpy old Sega bastards then, really.
Now, you're two guys who love a bit of Sega, and together you are known as the SEGAGuys. Now, we'll focus on what you do, the content you create, your history with Sega consoles in a little while. And we've also got some chat about hypothetical Dreamcast sequels, favourite and not so favourite Sega systems, Sega-based football, that's soccer for our American listeners. And wait for it, there's also a Sega quiz to test the SEGAGuys' knowledge. But first, we always like to ease in with a bit of a round table. So, gents, let's discuss why Wales did so poorly in the World Cup.
Shut up. I knew you were going to say something like that. I was waiting for it. Let's discuss Scotland's performance instead, yeah.
So the fact is, I'm that old. I remember the last time we made a World Cup, so it's like there's 20-somethings in the world in Scotland that I've never seen this country playing a World Cup. So
God, that's a good point, yeah. When was it? Was it 98? Was it World Cup 98?
France 98 was the last time, mate, aye.
God. I'll be honest, I never thought I would see Wales in a World Cup in my lifetime, so I'm just pretty glad it's happened when I'm still young enough and the right side of 40.
Yeah, I was going to say you won't see it again. So. Yeah. Of course, I jest. But we are going to talk about football in a little while, or soccer, as I've said. So, guys, let's start with our round table and let's pick a single game that we've all played. Well, not all played, but that we've picked up or played in the recent past, and tell each other and our listeners all about it. The caveat is, like Highlander, there can be only one. So, Dan, I've just noticed that you are Dan and James, who he actually plays for Wales, but I digress. Dan, I'm going to come to you first. Tell us about a game you've played or a game you've picked up. It could be a Dreamcast game, it could be a Sega Saturn game, it could be anything you like, even modern systems. So, yeah, please put us out of our misery.
So I think the best place for me to start really would be Sonic Frontiers, which obviously Sega related, so staying on topic. And to be honest, Tom, it's the most excited and most enthusiastic I've been about the series since probably the Sonic Adventure days.
Really?
yeah, I've absolutely loved. I finished it the other day, and I was a little bit sad that it was over, really, because I put that to the side and started God of War, which is Ragnarok, that is, which is amazingly high production value, immaculate looking game, but after coming from Sonic, which was so much fun and so fresh, it just felt a little bit dour. So I mean, coming back to Sonic, just the whole open zone thing just worked in a way that, when we first picked up Sonic Adventure, looking back at it now, you can see the creaks and everything, but that's kind of how you envisage, this open world kind of adventure thing that Sonic was on, and Sonic Frontiers just kind of takes it to the next level. So that's what I've been playing. I got it on release, and it was one that I really just couldn't put down. And so anyone that hasn't played it, highly recommend it.
See, you stole mine. I was going to do Sonic Frontiers, and I was going to have a completely different take on it, just to stir things up a bit. No, I did enjoy it. I've just finished it as well, but I just couldn't get past how generic and dull the enemies were in the game. And that was kind of compounded when you go and do some fishing, and then you fish up some old school, Sonic fish, and it's like, why couldn't these have been the enemies? So, yeah, I did enjoy it, but I wasn't as high on it as you were. I do agree that it's probably one of the best Sonic games, and I sat through and played through Sonic Forces and got some enjoyment out of that. But I think I just would have liked to have seen a little bit more creative license on the enemy types in the game, to be honest, because it just kind of felt a bit drab.
On that point, I completely agree with you. I think that was one of the things that dragged it down a little bit for me was the enemy design. It did feel a bit uninspired. I was thinking, this is the gameplay for me was key. It was amazing fun all the way through. But part of me in the back of my mind is thinking, well, the future, if you going in this approach, what does it hold from here? And in my head, I'm thinking of classic Sonic designs, bopping badniks rather than these sort of enemies and that sort of thing. So,
exactly.
I totally agree with you, mate.
I would have liked to have seen, that you get that sort of bonus section in Sonic Adventure 2 if you collect all the gold coins, and it's like an open world version of Green Hill Zone. Like, I would have liked to have seen something like that in Sonic Frontiers, more kind of based on the original Mega Drive visual style with the crosshatched like grass and that kind of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you see it a little bit in the cyberspace levels, although that they're a little bit garbled, and they're basically reusing their assets from Sonic Generations and Sonic Forces. So you see it a little bit, but I'd have loved to have seen a huge open world take on classic Sonic levels rather than the sort of linear cyberspace levels that you get. It seems like the assets were there, they just didn't use them.
Yeah, there was part of me that just felt they were trying to be too much Sonic Breath of the Wild in the open world stuff. Like, even so much as the sound effects when you complete one of the little puzzle things to unlock a beacon, and just the noises it makes when you do that, it was just like, man, this feels like Zelda in some ways. But it definitely showed promise. And I tell you what I did see today was the roadmap of the updates and stuff they're going to be doing. So it's good that they've got, a few little updates come in, one for Sonic's birthday as well, which would be good. And I know they've got some story DLC planned as well, which should breathe a new life into it as well.
The one thing that I took away from it, the visual style, it's quite realistic looking, the visuals, the landscapes. It reminded me of, like, if you took Sonic and sort of dropped him into, like, The Witcher or something. It just looks like so kind of... It just didn't, for me, it just doesn't look right. Sonic's meant to be like in a cartoon world, not like in White Orchard or whatever it's called.
Or maybe give him a real woman girlfriend.
We've already been down that route, haven't we?
Yeah.
The less I said about that, the better. So is that your pick as well, Jazz?
I'll pick a different one. That was just going to be my one. But the same time, I picked up Atari 50, which is, I'll be honest again, because I'm the right side of 40. Atari pretty much passed me by pretty dramatically. Never really played any Atari systems when I was a kid. Obviously, growing up as a retro gamer, I was aware of the, especially the arcade scene. But I was looking forward to the Atari 50 collection, mostly because of the handful of Jaguar games on there, because it's a system that obviously doesn't get emulated or re-released in any way up until this point. So I was going to buy it purely because Club Drive was on it. But, Digital Eclipse have just done a phenomenal job in presenting the collection in the way that they have. And I was listening to the IGN podcast the other day, Game Scoop, and they summed it up really nicely. And they said it doesn't feel like a retro game collection. It almost feels like they've created a new genre with the way that they've done the timelines in there. So for those who haven't played it, it has a bit of a narrative that goes along with it. So you kind of go into, the arcade sort of timeline or the 90s timeline, and it will go through all the different things that happened, and it might be some promotional artwork or some posters or a video about the making of one particular game. And you watch a video and you actually think, when they're talking about all the love that went into a game that they've just created, and you sort of think, I want to play that now, even though it would have been a game that I never would have thought to play in the first place. But yes, I played a lot of that, and mostly playing Jag stuff, to be honest, because, again, it's a system that I do own, but have never really played it, and was just intrigued, really, to take a step back into horrific 90s polygons and and got suckered into Cybermorph a lot more than I thought. I was messaging you, Tom, to say like, I'm amazed at how much this is just keeping me playing it over and over again, just to try and, finish off as much as I can of it. And it just got me thinking then, imagine Digital Eclipse were in charge of doing a Sega collection or a Dreamcast collection or something, if they put the same love and attention into it as what they did for the Atari 50, it would just be, it would be all of our wet dreams, right? Just to be able to go in and look at all the promotional stuff and the adverts and then play the games. It's really, really good, and strongly urge anyone to go and try it, whether you have a real passion for Atari or not, because even if you don't, I think there'll be something there for you to enjoy.
I would completely agree with everything you've said. I think it's probably the best sort of museum-style game I've ever played. Going all the way back to the origins of Atari, the stuff that you just don't really hear about online, and then being able to just play the games along the way as well is just superb.
They even talk about the infamous acid in the office coffee pot that may or may not have happened within Atari HQ back in the 70s, which was quite an interesting story.
Yeah, one thing I was kind of I thought was missing was the Jag CD stuff. I don't know what the Jaguar CD emulation scene is like, but it would have been nice to have some Battlemorph on there. And the reason I specifically mentioned Battlemorph is that game actually has Rob Brydon as one of the voice actors, a very early appearance of Rob Brydon. So
didn't you tweet him back in the day?
I did, yeah. I asked him if he was in Battlemorph, and he responded saying that yes, he remembers it, and that they recorded the audio in a tent in a field. So.
Do you know, just before we move on, that's the one thing I'll say, though. I think there are only, half a dozen or so Jaguar games on there. And I think there are so more that you would have liked to have seen on there, like Iron Soldier, for example, or Checkered Flag. And if anything now, it's made me want to play those games just to try them out. And it's frustrating because there's no easy way of doing that. Even if you're using original hardware, the games are so bloody expensive nowadays to get hold of just to sort of try. And emulation is just a bit of a hot mess as far as Jaguar is concerned. So, it's left me craving more Jaguar, which is a bit of a miracle, really.
I said nobody ever. Brilliant choice, and I agree with everything you've just said. James, enlighten us. What have you been playing?
Well, I just got my Rad 2X on my Saturn about a week and a half ago. I had that pre-ordered from September, so I've been kind of enjoying going through and playing bits and bobs on the Saturn, obviously just to kind of try out that nice new picture quality, which is really, really good. Really, really pleased with that. But
what is that? Can you explain what that is for people who don't know?
It's one of the kind of premium cables. It's Retro Game Cables UK.
Okay.
It does it. It's a double line upscaler with a smoothing function on it to kind of take about the kind of rough edges, because you know yourself, whenever you put kind of modern tellies, or you kind of pair modern TVs with the older consoles through HDMI, you get really, really hideous kind of jaggies, even more so than you would have on like a CRT. So this kind of smoothing filter just takes out. Some people like it, some people don't. But I think it looks really good whenever you couple it with that kind of modern display, and it just gives a nice bit of kind of sheen to it. Maybe makes it a lot softer, maybe like what a CRT would have.
Right.
So it's also got zero latency on it as well. So I had previously been using a Hyperkin cable, which I went through 3 of. The reliability of them's pretty poor. Like I've had like audio issues, buzzing noises, picture flicker and stuff like that. They're cheap made. But this kind of Rad 2X is kind of, as I say, it's RetroTink that I've kind of coupled up with this guy to provide the boards for it. And it's really, really good quality. Really, really good. The zero latency in comparison to using the Hyperkin. I'll never shit on anybody for the choice of cable they use, I think. I think on retro Twitter there seems to be there's far too much of that. Like, someone will say, I use this cable, and there's always some elitist that has to come along and go, oh, you should be using this or using that. See, if you pick up a 20 quid cable and you're happy with it, power to you, enjoy your games. I'm never going to sit here and shit on people for picking a cheaper option. That's a good thing just now in retro. There's just so many options across the board, for all budgets, whatever you want to connect through HDMI. There's this option, that option, ODEs as well. There's different options for different budgets. So the one kind of thing for me, I was happy with the Hyperkin. I never felt any massive lag in terms of input. But I have to say, whenever I did use the Rad 2X, I didn't feel anything major in terms of playing Sega Rally or Daytona or VF2 or anything like that. But where I did really feel the difference in the kind of input was on the Capcom 2D fighters. Okay. Like playing like Street Fighter 03 and X-Men vs Street Fighter, Marvel Superheroes vs Street Fighter, I did under the thumb feel, this is definitely a little bit more responsive. But the only reason I went for it was just because, again, this Hyperkin is cheap. It's not doing the job. The reliability is pretty poor on them. So rather than shell out another 30 quid for a Hyperkin or £1 or a level hike, these are all like clones of each other sort of thing. So rather than shelling out that again, it was actually Jason Madison, good buddy of the show. He'd got a Rad 2X before, and it's a funny story. I was actually on the transfer from the airport in Lanzarote to our hotel, and I just get my signal back, and I turned my phone on. It was Jason. He's like, mate, there's Rad 2X pre-orders up. So I was actually sitting on the bus to the hotel pre-ordering this cable. So it's been a while in getting here, but it's definitely worth the money. If you've not got an HDMI solution for your Saturn yet, and they do them for GameCube, they do them for Mega Drive, they do them for PlayStation, there's Dreamcast, they do component cables, but they're really, really hard to get. They come into stock and go straight back out again. But again, on the kind of dongle, there's a smoothing option. So again, if you use like a Kaiko or the VGA box, or connect direct through VGA to a monitor on Dreamcast, if it's not a CRT monitor, you'll probably notice that you lose what the Dreamcast was kind of famous for in the day, was the smoothness of the edges. You compare like Dead or Alive 2 on, Dreamcast to PS2 back in the day, it was like night and day. So this has got that smoothing button on the dongle there that you can flick that if you're using it on a modern display, just to take that harshness away. So they do loads of cables for various systems. So if you haven't yet picked up an HDMI solution, and obviously you're looking at getting one, I would certainly recommend the Rad 2X. It's a great bit of kit.
I'm literally just looking at the website now as you talk. That does look quite interesting. I'm looking at retrogamingcables.co.uk, and it's on here for $59.99, which seems a bit steep, but if you say you go through multiple pound or other cables, then this is a good investment, it looks like. So that's pretty cool. But what game have you used it with to take advantage of? So
I mean, as I say, I was just playing the Capcom 2D beat 'em ups, a bit of Last Bronx, a bit of Virtua Fighter 2, Sega Rally, of course. But I mean, if I had to pick the one game that I've been playing the most recently, and it's off the back of the World Cup episode that we did. Oh yeah. Virtua Striker 2 on the Dreamcast.
Nice.
Because I need to try and beat Sega FC. You've got to finish arcade mode in 1 credit to earn the right to play FC Sega, and I just I was getting so frustrated because they're rapid, and yourself in Virtua Striker 2, the minute the ball goes out wide, if the computer whips across them, they're going to score for a header or a bicycle kick or something ridiculous. So
rainbow kick.
Rainbow.
For those people listening who don't know what we're talking about, we will talk about this a little bit more in depth in a bit, but SEGAGuys did a fantastic episode of their podcast all about Sega World Cup games, and that's kind of what we want to talk about in a little while. Sega football games, really, on Sega platforms. So we will come back to that shortly. But yeah, thanks for that, James. Good choice. For me, I've been mainly playing on the PS5, but I've been playing a PS4 game on the PS5. I've been playing The Last of Us Part 2. I was a big fan of the first game on the PS4. Played it years ago when it came out on when it was remastered for the PS4 the first time. And when the sequel came out like a year ago or a year and a half ago, whenever it was, I didn't really have the time or the inclination to put back into that game and go back into a massive long adventure game again. It was £8 in a Black Friday sale on PSN, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. I started it, and I'm now about 9 hours in. And this was, a couple of days ago, so I'm really enjoying that. And it's just a really cool continuation of the Last of Us storyline. I know there was loads of, controversy about the story beats, and different characters may or may not be in the game for much of it, but I won't spoil it, no spoilers. But yeah, I'm really enjoying what I've played so far. So yeah, that's mainly what's been taking up my time. The Last of Us Part 2, yeah, great game. Right, that's the intro sorted. Let's get down to business. Let's talk. Why the SEGAGuys on the pod? Why you're here? Well, we want to know more about you. We want to know more about what you do, more about what the content is that you put out, and just have a little bit of a getting to know you session. So, the SEGAGuys, who are you? What do you do? And, how did it all start? You have got quite a following now online. So, over to you, really. Just tell us the story of how you started and, your history with... I know it's a big question, your history with Sega consoles, but, your history with Sega consoles and how did you two guys get together and start the SEGAGuys, really?
It's funny because I was trying to dig up the original tweet that kind of started this just before we came on, and it was actually a response to Super Nerd Simon's a guy on Twitter, his old account before he lost it. I believe the question was, because obviously the tweet's gone now, what's your favourite Sega console and why? And I replied with a picture of myself and my favourite Sega console, which is the Sega Saturn, saying that it was my favourite because it still feels exotic to me and feels like Sega at their most Sega-y and at their most inventive. And then some original Dreamcast guy comes on and says, well, I think that the Dreamcast is when Sega are at their most inventive. And we got talking back and forth. And James turned out said, should we write a blog post on it? I'll do a joint one. You'll argue why you think the Saturn's the most inventive, and I'll argue why the Dreamcast is the most inventive. Okay. So then all of a sudden that started snowballing, and then that became, well, why don't we try a podcast? And I hadn't had any experience with podcasts at the time. James, he had experience with a football-orientated Napoli podcast. So I took James's lead, and it just kind of went from there. And kind of like we still do today, would you just WhatsApp message each other and just throw ideas at each other, and it just kind of grew from there.
I think that's the best way sometimes, isn't it? It's just spontaneous, and the fact that it started with a tweet, and that's what I love stories like that where there's no kind of like real like master plan or planning that went into it. It's just it came about.
Started with a tweet.
I mean that is the thing though. It's like. There was nothing kind of planned about it. The whole thing kind of happened really organically. It was just a kind of chance coming together over that tweet. But, it's kind of funny. Like, I mean, Dan and I joke. I think we speak to each other every day more than we speak to anybody else. I put out with our families. I think at some point, it's like we'll joke that we'll interrupt each other while we're working with random ideas for the podcast. Like I'll send Dan ridiculous voice clips with stupid impressions with ideas for the pod, and he'll come back to me with stuff, and it's just like, I'm trying to work here, man. It's like this poor guy must be sitting in a meeting just hearing his phone, his Street Fighter 2 credit get in. That's his notification when he's phoned for a message is the noise. Have you put a credit in his Street Fighter 2? And
Don't worry. Whenever I WhatsApp Tom with an idea for the blog or for the podcast, I just get a sarcastic picture of Alan Partridge with a dictaphone back at me, and I just leave it at that. Then
I was thinking that exact thing earlier. Sometimes when we ping these ideas, I think, am I really just turning into Alan Partridge? Idea for a podcast.
Yeah, but literally now it's got to the point where in the group chat we just reply with everything with idea for the pod and then ... and then what we're actually talking about.
That's what it is, isn't it? I mean, we've got like a list. Like, we joke, it's like Jericho, you just made the list. It's like, we'll fire ideas back and I'll say, mate, just like that idea for the pod. What do you think of this, this and this? It's going on the list and that's it. And like Dan sent me, we'll get to like Wednesday afternoon, we'll go, right, what do you want to record tonight? And we'll forget that much on the list that we'll forgot what's on the bloody thing. So he'll send me back and we'll look at it and we'll go, well, what do you fancy? It's like an old married couple looking at a takeaway menu on a Friday night. It's like,
yeah.
Do you want a sausage supper? No, I fancied fish and chips tonight. It's like, but it works. It works really well.
Yeah.
I say we're both kind of very, very like-minded, hold similar opinions, like pretty much the same games, and just kind of bounce off each other really, really well.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've picked up on when I've been watching and listening to your. Obviously, I watched the video podcast, and I listened to the audio ones, and it's the chemistry that you guys have got. And I think that's the beauty of like social media in the modern age. You can find people, you know, that have got similar interests, and like you guys, I'm guessing you live at opposite ends of the country, and you found each other through a shared love of Sega, on the internet, and obviously now you've created this brand, as it were. So
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, especially us being at other ends of the country, but our journey through gaming is extremely similar. I mean, we just recorded an episode on Amiga games on the Mega Drive, which was meant to talk mainly about the games on the Mega Drive, but we started off saying, well, let's do five or six games, 10 minutes on each. We'll keep this at about an hour. And then we spent about 40 minutes gushing about playing 8-bit micros and home computers. But we both started, in that computer scene and then went through Sega. And it's amazing, as I say, opposite ends of the country. But our experiences with buying a Sega Saturn was scarily almost identical with the way that we were, engaging with the people in the shop, and they were like trying to push us towards the PlayStation at the time. It's kind of crazy that we share those experiences, and I think that's probably key to why we do have partially key to why we have that chemistry.
Yeah, and so we'll talk about that. What is your history with like Sega as a brand? Like, how did it influence your sort of childhood and growing up and that kind of thing?
Well, for myself, I started off with a Commodore 64, and I think I was mentioning this a little bit on our Sega Power episode. But I had the Commodore 64. I was the only person in the house with a computer at the time, and all games back then were computer games, weren't they? Whether you had a console or whether you had a computer. My brother wanted to play on my little brother wanted to play on my Commodore 64, and I'd let him sometimes, but being a 9-year-old older brother, sometimes I was a bit of a dick. So he wanted his own computer game. So my mum was, going through the Argos catalogue at the time and showed me a Sega Master System too, and said, I'm thinking of getting this for Sonny for his birthday. I said, yeah, all right, get him that. I think it was like 50 quid at the time, because they were going really cheap in like the early 90s. Thinking it won't be as good as my proper computer with a keyboard and everything upstairs. He got it on his birthday. Alex the Kid built in, and then the family came over, and obviously they were told, buy him Master System games. So I was playing Alex Kid, and I was thinking, this is great. Then one auntie gave him Space Harrier. It's still got the $9.99 sticker on it, which says how little those games were going for back then. And then when I saw that, I was like, oh my god, Commodore 60 what? let me have a go on that with you, bro. And then played Mickey Mouse Castle of Illusion came, but then my uncle came over with this one of the newer games. He always kind of spoiled me and my brother and sister. My uncle came over. He had two games. I can't remember what the other one was, but the main one was Sonic the Hedgehog, which had not long come out from my brother's just before my brother's birthday. And from playing Sonic the Hedgehog on the Master System, it was kind of, I was instantly in love And I think from that point, I was just all in on Sega. I was completely obsessed with him, if I'm honest. I kept my eye on the sequel.
And this was in the age before, like the sort of the Sonic fandom as it's known today. I think I was very much the same. I would draw Sonic on like my school books and things like that, but it wasn't as kind of, I don't know, ferocious as it is now on the internet. So
no, I mean it was 1991, so Sonic the Hedgehog 2, was rumoured, and obviously I think it was in development at that point. But we only heard rumours in the magazines. But I did an assembly, and people were saying what their favourite animal and what pet they want is, and everyone's like, I want a cat, I want a dog, and I was like, I want a hedgehog, and I want to call him Sonic. And I got teased a bit for saying that as well. It's one of my mates who I know from back then still says it. But yeah, I was obsessed. So we got Sonic 2 on the Master System, and I was gutted that Tails wasn't in it. So I begged and pleaded for us all to get a Mega Drive for Christmas 1992, which we got as a shared present. And it kind of went from there, really. Mega Drive saw me up to 1996, where I saved up all my paper round money, and my birthday money went all in on the Sega Saturn, which saw me through until I got a Dreamcast in March or April 1999, because I couldn't wait to get a Dreamcast at the time. I was getting import Saturn games that kind of tied me over. But the thought of this 15-month gap between the end of the Power Saturn and the release of the Power Dreamcast, I plugged it with imports, and then I just took the dive on the Dreamcast, and yeah, that's my console history, my Sega console history.
It's pretty comprehensive. Other than the SG-1000, I mean, you can't really jump in any earlier, really, can you? So, wow, yeah. And what about you, James? What's your story?
Well, I mean, I come in very similar to kind of Dan, as he said there. It's like, home computers. He had the C64. I had the Spectrum. I had a 128K plus 2. So again, I kind of started that home computer scene. The story that I'm going to tell, Dan will need to put yourself on mute because he's probably, heard it hundreds of times before already. But basically, I'd had the Spectrum for that long. And if you remember, if you had a tape-based kind of computer, you always got these black briefcases that had like the plastic tape holder inserts in them. Mm-hmm. And I had like 10 of these full of Spectrum games. And like my mum says to me, we'll sell your Spectrum in the classifieds, and you can get yourself a Mega Drive. And I was over the moon with this. I'm finally getting this Mega Drive. This is amazing. But unfortunately, family intervened and said that I had to have an educational computer that could also play games. And I ended up with an Atari ST. I will never forget whenever that box gets slid out from behind the couch in the living room, and I was meant to be happy with this piece of shit. But I mean, obviously, I then moved on, as Dan would have alluded to, with the fact that we did an Amiga on the Mega Drive episode recently. My uncle upgraded his A500 to a 500 Plus. I got the 500. The ST got sold on. Never seen the money from that. That obviously got pocketed by somebody. But, I think a large part of what made my kind of family's decision at that point was that the Amiga was very easy to pirate games for. You had you'd X-copy a packet of blank discs, found your mates, raid his collection, copy the games, that kind of thing. Got up to the local market in Glasgow called the Barras, which was full of stalls that would sell pirate games, £2 for your first disc, £1 for every other disc. So I think they looked at it that for £60 that it would cost for Sonic, you could buy all these Amiga games. So there was a large element of that. But at the time that I was obviously playing the Amiga, I went to the arcades a lot. My uncle used to take me to the arcades on a Saturday, and there was one called Booth's Enterprises in Glasgow on Union Street. And they always had the latest Sega games in, and they continued to do so all the way through until like the Dreamcast was out. And it was in there that I played like Virtua Fighter, and I used to play that every weekend. I was totally mesmerised by it. And the kind of only game on the Amiga that was any kind of decent in terms of beat 'em ups, the Street Fighter 2 port was crap, Mortal Kombat was okay, Rise of the Robots was complete and utter mince. So there was nothing that could come close to Virtua Fighter. You had like Body Blows on the Amiga, which was a not bad beat 'em up tailored for that hardware. But it was a 2D fair that was nothing like what Virtua Fighter was. And then obviously, on launch day, July 8th, 95, we used to visit my uncle's every kind of Friday and Saturday. And he was a techie kind of guy. He always, back in the 90s, he always had the latest stuff, whether it was home cinema, projection screens, projection tellies, laser disc, mini disc, the works. This guy just used to buy anything and everything that came out. And I remember out upstairs, turned to the left, and he had his home cinema room to the left of the stairs, and he blocked me off at the door. And he obviously had the Saturn hooked up to his home cinema because the sound was booming. Yeah. And all I could hear, he just had something behind his back, and he blocked me off, and he went, wait for it. And obviously all I could hear was a ding, and then the intro music and the character select music, and then silence. And then all I heard was fight one, ready, go. And I was like, holy shit, he's got Virtua Fighter in there. And the known uncle, like, I expected it to be the fucking arcade machine that was in there, right? Given that he bought everything. But it was the Saturn. And I just remember he had him with the controller, and he had it hooked up. He had a big 50-inch rear projection TV with his home cinema system, and sound was booming. And he also just picked Akira by default because he had the button behind his back, and like, there's nothing happening. Jackie's kicking Akira's arse, and I'm just standing looking at this, absolutely mesmerised. The fact that Virtua Fighter's in someone's house. How is this happening? And it was there, and then obviously that's whenever the real kind of Sega bug bit. It was Virtua Fighter was very much the catalyst for it. And again, I would support that system all the way through its life. Towards the tail end, whenever I started getting into having a part-time job while I was at college, I saved up kind of money to go towards importing a Dreamcast. Again, scarily similar to Dan, end of March, start of April. Put some more money towards that while I started importing Saturn games from Japan. I would get hardware as well. I had like the white Saturn console, the grey Saturn console, arcade stick, steering wheels, 3D controllers. It was all dirt cheap to import for Japan. But yeah, I got my Japanese Dreamcast, similar time to Dan, end of March, start of April. Family put the rest of the money towards it for my birthday. And that's it. It's just, that whole catalyst for me was Virtua Fighter in the arcade, and then the Saturn on launch day. But the kind of romantic side of that is that during lockdown, my uncle, because I got my own Saturn Christmas '96, but the Saturn that I played on launch day, my uncle used to work away all the time, so he wasn't a gamer. He never used it. It was used like for a couple of hours, every other weekend when I went up to visit. So after I got my own Saturn and kind of began to socialise and go out more with my friends, stop visiting at weekends and stuff like that Saturn just get shunted up in the loft, allegedly or apparently so, because during lockdown, I got a message from him, and he said, look what I found up in the loft, and it was a picture of the Saturn. That same Sega Saturn that I played on launch day, and I wrote a piece for our blog about it actually, and it was covered in this kind of pasty white undercoat spray that he'd obviously been doing up in the loft, a project and something like DIY. And he said, you can have it. I don't have a box for it. I've got no games for it. I've only got a power cord for it. You'll need to get everything sourced yourself. And I did. And, that Sega Saturn that I played on launch day is what I play on just now. So, as kind of daft as it might sound to some people, the romantic hook that I've got to that, the kind of emotional hook that I've got to that, not just the Saturn as a system, but to that particular Sega Saturn, the one that's upstairs just now, like that I can look at that and I've got history with that exact machine. And it's great that, I did go into mod it, and I've put a Pico PSU in there, and I've put a Fenrir ODE in there, that the drive went to Dan to bring one of his Saturns back to life. And obviously the PSU went to yourself, Tom.
You did, yes.
So, I like the fact that I've got my original Saturn back, the one I played on launch day, that there's that much meaning behind it, but it's also helped two people who I've got a lot of time for. It's helped them bring their systems back as well. So It's worked out absolutely perfect. So sorry for jabbering on for so long, but that's my Sega history.
That's a great story. Yeah,
I can totally relate to that as well with like the individual unit, because I mean I've got a weird sort of affinity to my launch Dreamcast as well. For no reason, it's just it looks the same as every other one, but I've still got my little gameplay sticker on the side of it that I put on, and it's ever so slightly yellowed, which I will not change because I don't want to, and I end up buying a whole new Dreamcast to stick a GDMU in and whatever else I want to do with it. But my OG Dreamcast is as it was when I used to play it every day, and I can totally see, it's although they're all identical, there's just the little things about them that just tug on those nostalgia strings a little bit more than normal. Sorry,
that's the
Tom.
thing. Yeah, they're all the same, but there's none quite like your own, is there?
Exactly.
I'm sitting here at the desk at the moment, and I've got my Japanese Dreamcast in front of me, the one that I bought on import all those years ago. I've got other ones. James was very kind to send me a GDMU, and that wasn't going in the Japanese one because that one stays exactly as is. But I've got another unit that I brought back to life with it. It's kind of like I've also, my original Mega Drive is with my sister at the moment. I've got one that's region switched, but it's got a big Sonic the Comic hands off my Mega Drive sticker on there. And every time I see my sister,
God, I remember that.
Yeah, I'll be like, you are looking after that Mega Drive, aren't you? Don't let anything happen to it.
I feel, to be honest, these are all great stories, but I actually feel personally attacked because I sold all of my Dreamcast stuff to buy a PS2 in like 1999 when it was all going, in 2001, whenever it was, when it was all going down the toilet. So,
well, I mean, there's a funny story about that GDMU as well, isn't there, Dan?
Yeah.
Because obviously I picked up like a PAL Dreamcast and or CEX for like 40 quid. And I was like, and then I started buying games back, and then kind of like, obviously, because I sold all my stuff in 2008 that I'd amassed whenever I moved house. Daft decision, but that's what I did. Yeah, so I picked up this I always talk to you on WhatsApp about that as well. But I bought this PAL Dreamcast and I started buying games, then the GD-ROM died, and I was like, I'm not going down the route of buying more disc drives. I went, what mods are out there, and that's what took me down the kind of modding route. But this Dreamcast, basically, after 40 minutes or so of gameplay, it kept on like either resetting or textures would disappear, which is quite it can happen. And sometimes it can be like a power issue. You need to clean the power pins on the motherboard or bend them back slightly so they make better connection. I tried all of that. I went out and I blamed it on the GDMU being wonky. I bought a new one of those. Blamed it on the power supply. I replaced a Pico PSU with a Dream Power PSU. I blew a stock PSU through testing, because obviously if you run the GDMU with a stock PSU, even in the PAL region, if you remove the 12-volt regulator, it still gets too bloody hot. So you can kind of shove resistors into the power pins between the ground and the 5-volt, but that's janky as hell. So you can melt your case if they're too high. But I went through all this rigmarole, replaced all these parts, and the thing still kept on fucking resetting, and I was losing the rag with it. So whenever I had basically bought this second GDMU, I sent this one to Dan, and I went, look, mate, it might reset on you, but you'll get maybe 40 minutes of gameplay. It turned out there was nothing wrong with the GDMU, because actually, to get down to the root of the problem, I replaced the motherboard, and that fixed it. So there was obviously one of the caps. There was something not right, because if GDMU picks up the voltage drops below 3.3 volts, it will reset. It's got undercurrent protection built in, and that's on the clone and on the original. So if it detects that there's an undercurrent, then it will reset, or it will cause graphical issues, apparently, to quote-unquote protect itself. How's that protecting itself? By fucking up my experience by playing this game. That's not protecting anybody. So I'd say to him, look, mate, it might reset. I replaced the motherboard and it fixed it. So it turned out that he got a perfectly fine, fully functional GDMU, which is good because it means it lets him kind of explore bits of the library that he never would have got to before. But it was all because I was blaming bits that weren't to blame.
It's like that old, the old sort of tale where you have a ship, and if you replace the mast, and you replace the deck, and then you replace the hull, is it still the same ship?
Well, I think my current Dreamcast just now is like that. It's like a jack of all trades, because the motherboard that I have now is a Japanese motherboard. Dan sent me a Japanese shell, which I did have a PAL shell in, because obviously not trying to trigger Jazz here, right, but because I wanted the orange swirl. But I had an orange swirl shell with a blue swirl PAL motherboard with all these mods in it, and I went, nah, it just annoys me whenever I switch it on. Sega Whisperer sent me a Japanese motherboard, and that just completed it. So again, while it's not like my original Japanese Dreamcast, the fact that I have a Japanese Dreamcast again, albeit it's cobbled together from God knows how many systems and mods, but it does the job and it works. Touch every single bit of wood that I can find that it still works.
You're in good company here, mate, because I've got my famous little bag full of Dreamcasts. They're all Frankencasts. Do you know what I mean? They're all from different systems. So we've spoken about our favourite, or rather, you guys have spoken about your favourite systems. Are there any systems in the Sega sort of family that you have no affinity for, or you're just not fans of?
Dreamcast. No, I've managed to be lucky enough to get my hands on all of them, including the 32X and the Mega CD over the years. And I've got to be honest, there's none that I don't have affinity for. I love every single piece of Sega hardware there is. I did do a blog post ranking the Sega systems, and if I had to choose one that came bottom, it'd probably be the 32X. But no, I love absolutely all of them. I mean, top of the pile for me is the Saturn, the Mega Drive, and Dreamcast after would be my top three, all within my top 5 consoles of all time of any type. But yeah, anything Sega, I just eat it up, including Game Gear, Mega CD, Master System, 32X. Love them all.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I'm the same. I mean, I've pretty much owned every Sega console other than an SG-1000 and that sort of family of consoles. I've owned them all. And I think I'd say the same. Probably my least favourite was the 32X, just because of how janky it was and the fact that you could put cartridges in and they wouldn't play. And there's all these different I think the Jaguar was the most temperamental system that had cartridges that I've ever owned. But the 32X is up there as well. Or your cable's not plugged in properly, and this, that, and the other. It's like, oh my god,
yeah,
it's going to work.
It's awful to put together. I've got a lead. You've got to connect the AV lead from the back of the Mega Drive into the 32X, and then you've got the extra lead that goes to the telly. But to get stereo sound out of my Mega Drive 1 console, it's got an extra lead that comes out and plugs into the headphone jack. So then you've got leads coming out there, and then you've got the 3 power cables that all go out. Luckily, I've got a replacement power supply, which the 3 cables go into one plug. But when I had it as 3 separate plugs, it was an absolute nightmare. It's a beastly thing. Like you think, to play those Mega CD 32X games. I mean, what maniac thought that was a good idea? Sega, obviously.
Can you imagine that in this day and age, with everything being like sort of super sleek and sort of the amount of R&D that goes into it? That where you've got 3 plugs, you've got to plug this into that into that. It's like a switchboard, isn't it? It's like a console switchboard.
The thing is that the original plugs, the original power supplies, are so chunky that they won't even sit next to each other. So if you've got a 4-gang, if you've got like a 4-gang extension league, you're buggered because you've got no way to plug them all in. So it's absolute madness. I think there's even an AVGN 32X video where he's trying to put the 2 plugs in together and they just won't fit. I know our plugs are a little, we've got a bit more space, but if you've got a 4-gang extension league, they still won't fit in. It's baffling. But as janky and as stupid as it is, I still love it.
Yeah. What about you, James? Have you got any system that you're not really got an affinity for, or
SEGAGuys? No, but just don't show me anything to do with Atari, honestly.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't buy the Atari collection. There's a whole bit on there about the Atari SD. You'll be triggered.
I think it's as well. Like, I even got betrayed when it came to handhelds because, again, I kept getting taken to the town and to play these before Christmas, 2 months before Christmas, into Tandies, and they had like a podium with Game Boy, Game Gear, and Atari Lynx 2, and like my uncle kept on, what one do you like? I'm obviously hinting, right, I want one of these for Christmas, so you're kind of trying to sound me out here. And I kept, Sonic, Game Gear, kept going to Game Gear. We didn't open up on Christmas. The Batman Returns pack on the Atari Lynx 2.
Oh, what?
So I didn't get let down by getting Atari once, it was twice it happened. So, just that Atari logo just makes me want to vomit. Sorry, it just a scourge on my gaming past.
I'm just envisaging the artwork for this episode with your face with an Atari logo vomiting out of its mouth. So.
I mean, I can work on that with you after the show's finished, mate. That's not a problem.
That's brilliant. Let's move the conversation slightly back towards the Dreamcast and also the Saturn, actually. I thought it might be quite interesting to just talk a little bit about some of the sequels that appeared on the Dreamcast that first started on the Saturn. And originally, I was looking at just mainly first-party games, but Jaz moaned about that, so I've decided to renege on that limitation and... Renege, that's a good word, isn't it?
There was no moaning, by the way.
Okay.
There was constructive criticism to your short list.
So we've got in my initial list, I put things like Sega Rally 2, Virtua Fighter 3 TB, House of the Dead 2. But after Jaz's moaning, constructive criticism, I added things like Daytona USA. Obviously, that's just like more of a
shitty racing game.
Thank you. Yeah, more of a series rather than just a single game. And then things like D2, which obviously were not Saturn exclusives, but the sequel was a Dreamcast exclusive. So, I don't know, guys. I know you've got a particularly fondness, James, for Sega Rally. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts on Sega Rally 2? I mean, what's your opinion on that game?
It's the sequel that should have been a lot better than it was.
Agree.
I think the whole Windows C development, I don't know whether Sega chose to develop Rally 2 on Windows C as a kind of a pet project to show Microsoft that they were using it. I don't know what the deal is with it, but it's not anywhere near as good as we know the hardware can do. I think we all know that the Dreamcast could have easily handled a far better port of Sega Rally 2 than we got. Just a shame that I know there's kind of code you can put in to remove kind of like scenery and crowds and foliage and stuff to try and help the frame rate. The Japanese version is slightly smoother, although it does have drops, but from what I understand, it doesn't have... I think the PAL and American versions got capped at 30 to try and kind of minimise the kind of severity of the drops, but when you're on corners and there's a car in front of you, the drop in frame rate on the PAL and American versions is quite jarring.
It's severe, it's severe.
If you play the Japanese version, because it has more of an unlocked frame rate, it's not quite as jarring a drop. So you do still notice that there's drops there, but they're not anywhere near as bad as on the PAL and American versions. And it was early at the start of the year, someone actually replied to me and kind of backed me up because they ran all three versions through like a frame rate monitor and actually came back and said that, there are still significant drops in the Japanese version, but because they're dropping from a higher frame rate, you're going from maybe 60 down to 40 or 60 down to 35. You're not going from like 30 down to 20, 30 down to 15 on some of these corners where it's quite jarring. So the Japanese version is the best way to play it. For some reason, it's the version that's got the Ford Focus in it, which isn't in the British version or the PAL version, but it's a British car, so rather a Western car. So you're thinking, why are you taking Ford out of the Japanese version but not putting it in the Western releases? Yeah, so the handling on it it's more closer to the arcade game. It's more floaty. Like I think there's a slight disconnect between the track and the cars. You don't quite get that feeling of grip to the track that makes the Saturn version so special, that they built that game from the ground up for the Saturn without using the SGL. They made their own engine for it, and they've somehow managed to capture the three different terrains, your mud, dirt and asphalt. They've managed to capture the feeling of being on those surfaces into a D-pad. Like, when you're on those surfaces, you can feel it under your thumb, but there's no sensory input. There's no motion control or rumble or anything like that on the Saturn, but you still know, and you have to fight the controller on those different surfaces. So the Saturn port of the first game is still the far superior game, but it's not really fair on the Dreamcast that we didn't get the port of Sega Rally 2 that we deserved, because it's a great game and that system deserved far better.
That was the biggest letdown for me, I think. I mean, I came into Dreamcast from PlayStation. I never ever got into Saturn as in that generation. I was all PlayStation, so I missed out on a lot of these classic games like Sega Rally. And I remember looking at all the screenshots of Sega Rally 2 prior to Dreamcast coming out, and thinking, "Oh, I can't wait to play this. It's going to be so good. It's going to be so good." And I just remember the handling. Like, the frame rate is one thing. I don't think my 15 or 16-year-old mind would have really known the difference back then, but it was the handling just felt atrocious to me. It just didn't feel like I had any control over what I was playing. And I've since gone back to it, and I must admit, I played it the other week actually, and I enjoy it a lot more now because you kind of adapt to it a lot better. But it just didn't. It never struck me as that kind of killer app that Sega Rally clearly was to Saturn at the time, that all the Saturn owners were sort of raving about. And I agree, it should have been a flagship, a flagship launch title over here when it came out, but instead it was eclipsed by, a couple of other racing games that came out. So
yeah, just to move away from Sega Rally slightly. I mean, I feel the same about Daytona. I wasn't a big fan of the first game on the Saturn, but the follow-up Championship Circuit Edition, I did quite like that. And then when Daytona 2001 came out on the Dreamcast, I found that the shift of handling model to more of almost like they were trying to mimic very slightly Ridge Racer by making it all about drifting around corners.
It's very Ridge Racer, yeah.
I was like, why have they done this? I mean, I don't get. It's not you don't watch NASCAR races and see the cars going sideways around tracks. Do you know what I mean? It's not that kind of racing.
They just went way too far into that side, the drift side of it. I mean, it just, you literally cannot take a single corner without drifting, whereas at least in something like Ridge Racer, you can take shallow corners without having to drift sideways in it, whereas you just can't do that in Daytona 2001.
The thing is as well, though, I mean, the ironic thing is that the original Saturn port of Daytona is the only version up until the PS360 version came out that actually nailed the arcade handling. Like, it's the best playing version, despite the fact it runs at like 20-25 frames a second. It's bizarre. It's the one version of the game, especially if you play the NTSC version at 60 Hz, it still plays really great. CCE was made by the Sega Rally team, so they changed the design of the car, they changed the camera angle slightly. The handler is completely different. Again, Daytona USA 2001, the Japanese version didn't feature any ability to tweak the handling. They did bring that to the Western versions as a handling tweak in it, so you can change the analog sensitivity on the stick and the triggers. But no matter how much you tweak it, it still doesn't feel like Daytona. Whereas the Saturn version, that original version, really does. And it was really pleasing on DF Retro that John Linneman, in the episodes called Daytona USA, Why Frame Rate Has Always Mattered. And he even picks up on the fact that despite the Saturn original having a lower frame rate, it nails the handling of the arcade game. And that's why whenever I play Daytona today, I'll always go back to I've got like the arcade perfect version on the Xbox.
Yeah.
But that, again, it's just that kind of charm. I just love that Saturn port. I just think it's great fun to play. And again, it was wrongly maligned back in the day because Ridge Racer was ported from hardware that was far closer to it in the arcade. But you think back to what Model 2, Daytona came out in 93, it came out in arcades as a kind of test in limited kind of regions, and then it made its worldwide debut in 94. And a year later, you're playing that in the house, a Model 2 game. So again, we've done an episode that's coming out on the 5th of December. It's the Saturn Western launch reviews, and we touch on that because the Saturn port of Daytona was a far more ambitious project than the Ridge Racer port on PlayStation was. Like, I think this is System 22 board that Ridge Racer runs on, so it's mimicking. It's a slightly, I think System 22 to Ridge Racer is kind of like what maybe like Naomi was to Crazy Taxi. It's like It's based on that hardware, but it's got a slightly higher clock GPU and a bit more kind of RAM in there. So it's a bit more powerful, but it's still on a kind of similar family spec. Whereas Saturn's got nothing in common with Model 2 at all, but yet they were still trying to give you Daytona USA, the cutting edge arcade tech of the time, in the house in '95. So the PAL version wasn't well optimised. It was very letterbox and it didn't run full speed. So I think over here it didn't help. But if you can go back and play the NTSC versions now, there's pop-up, but it's still a lot of fun. And the handling is absolutely nailed on. So Daytona USA Defence Force.
Yeah, I was going to say I found that the really intrusive pop-up was actually, it added to the challenge of not knowing where the corner was going to go as you got to it. So am I going left? Am I going right? I can't tell. It's just a skybox.
No, I mean, we all defend that game to the hilt, myself and James, and I think we both come from very similar views that it's hugely ambitious. I was playing it recently. Shock Bites does this time trial challenge every week, and the other week she chose Daytona USA on the Sega Saturn, and I was playing it for well over an hour and loved every second of it. And the thing is, I still think it's extremely impressive. Yes, the pop-up is really jarring and the frame rate is low. Even if I've got the PAL version, I put it into 60 hertz mode and it's still you can still see that it's like 20 frames per second or lower. But the handling holds up, and the fact that there's 40 cars on the track, no other game that generation does it apart from F-Zero X. So I don't think it gets the credit it deserves because it's not easy on the eye, but I still think it plays like a dream.
Good point. Very good point. Well made. We have mentioned some other games here that were sequels to Saturn games on the Dreamcast. So you got House of the Dead 2, Virtua Fighter 3 TB. Are there any games that were on the Saturn that you would have liked to have seen have Dreamcast sequels that we never got? I mean, it's a massively hypothetical question. I'd like to have seen like a Night sequel on the Dreamcast or something like that. Yeah. But what games stick out to you guys that were like crying out for a Dreamcast sequel, but we just never got for whatever reason?
Yeah, Nights is the top one. I mean, when I first played Sonic Adventure, my friend got his Dreamcast like a week before I did, and I managed to like coerce him and his parents and my parents to let me stay over his and basically play it all night. And when I saw that pinball table, the Nights pinball table, I thought it's coming, and obviously it never did. Nights into Dreams was my favourite Sega Saturn game, so that was a massive one. I would have loved a new Fighters Megamix on the Dreamcast. Yes. I still think it's absolutely mental that we don't have a Fighters Megamix 2 today. You think of all the fighting games and all the different characters. It was basically a proper fighting game, Smash Brothers, before Smash Brothers was even a thing. It's insane that with the amount of characters and franchises that Sega has, that they've just never lent into it and really made it what it could really be. It's frustrating, but I suppose that's Sega all over.
Do you remember there was I have vague recollections of this? You remember the magazine CVG?
Oh yes,
they did like it was like an April Fool. It was like a Tekken versus Virtua Fighter kind of mashup.
I remember that well.
Yeah, and I just remember saying, "What?" And it didn't even click in my mind that it was an April Fool. It was just like, oh, this is going to be amazing. I told my PlayStation mates at school, see, you're going to get Tekken on the Saturn. It turned out to be complete fabrication and lie. Damn them. What about you, James? Any thoughts on what you would have liked to have seen?
I mean, Nights, again, as Dan went straight to, that's the kind of obvious one. And obviously that pinball table, you get, was it Welcome to Nightopia? The music, do. Nights is flying through the air and goes through the kind of scenery, and you come back to the pinball table, and it's just absolutely beautiful. Burning Rangers, another one.
Yeah.
Panzer Dragoon, which I think anybody who looks at what came out on the OG Xbox and even Virtua Fighter 4 going to PS2, I think given the time frame that those came out, I think we can all look at stuff like Jet Set Radio Future, Gun Valkyrie, Crazy Taxi 3, Virtua Fighter 4, as we said, Panzer Dragoon Orta. Those were all going to be Dreamcast games had the system not been discontinued.
100%, yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I actually think VF4 would have looked better on Dreamcast than it did on... It was very dull on PS2. I thought it was... Obviously, it was an Iome 2 game, so a little bit more powerful, but again, from the same family that Dreamcast belonged to, so I think the port of that would have been better on Dreamcast. So those were all Dreamcast games waiting to happen, but Dan and I have got this kind of view that with the Dreamcast, Sega tried to be more PlayStation. And I think that's why, if you look around the kind of Dreamcast audience that you see just now, a lot of you guys, obviously Tom, you've got a kind of storied Sega history, but you look at a lot of people that have maybe come to Dreamcast from PlayStation, and they were trying to get that PlayStation audience to come over.
Yeah. And
to do that, I think they tried to be less Sega, but they were almost kind of torn. Like, they were turning around and going, we don't want to stigmatise the Dreamcast with arcade ports, so we're not going to give you Scud Race or Daytona USA 2. And then somewhere down the line, they kind of had a brain fart and went back to old Sega and went, here's 18-wheeler, pro-American trucker. It's like, what the fuck? It's like what is this game? So I think they were kind of conflicted in a way when it came to Dreamcast, that they were wanting to kind of chase that more casual market, which was the right thing to do, because obviously wanted to try and make the Dreamcast this massive success and to try and stay in the game, but it just didn't happen. So I think there's a deluge of Xbox games that we really should have seen on Dreamcast had it not been discontinued. But I'd have loved to have seen Knights, Panzer Dragoon and Burning Rangers on Dreamcast.
No, nobody's talking about Bug then. Bug 3?
I did. No. I was thinking Clockwork Knight and Bug. I do enjoy them both, but Deep Fear, I think, would have been a really good sequel on Dreamcast. I do joke sometimes that it was the best survival horror game of 1998, but it is, very awful voice acting aside. I think Deep Fear is an exceptional survival horror game. It's just a shame that series is just kind of stuck in Sega Saturn jail, because there's just one of so many games that just sits on that exclusive to the Saturn's library and is just never going to get any sort of sequel or remake. It's just a shame. And Bug, for all his sins, he's there as well.
I remember playing Crash Bandicoot and just laughing at seeing demos of Bug running at the time. As a console warrior, a 13-year-old console warrior.
I just want to meet you now, Jaz. I just want to meet you and kick you out of the chat. It's funny you mentioned that, actually, James, about Sega kind of thinking they were going to go one way and then suddenly go another way. I just have this instant image in my mind of, that meme of that car kind of careening off the highway. Going, like, arrow pointing up, going, get the PlayStation crowd, and then arrow pointing right, saying, attract the Sega fans. It's just like, and then, like you say, we ended up with 18-wheeler. Some of the games I would have liked to have seen sequels to are things like Sega Touring Car.
Don't bother asking me then, Tom. You just stole mine as well, but you crack on, mate. Supposed to be a host, honestly.
Sorry, mate. Sorry, I'm having a bit of a nightmare tonight, aren't I? Sega Touring Car would have liked to have seen. I would have liked to have seen some like lesser known games get sequels, so they could have come to a new audience, like things like Sky Target. That'd have been cool.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. We're talking about things like fighting games. Maybe something like Last Bronx would have been cool to get a new version on the Dreamcast. There's so much when you think about this. There's so much they could have like plundered from the history that people probably didn't play because not that many people had a Saturn compared to a PlayStation. It's like what Nintendo did with the Wii U. They're getting all these games back out of the cupboard because not many people played them on the Wii U. And I mean, I think again, just going back to what James said earlier about it not being a console that lived too long on, without going on to life support. If it had lived longer and had the actual lifespan it should and did deserve to have, then we would have got more of these games being brought back out again. So,
what about Mr. Bones? Mr. Bones 2 on the Dreamcast.
I mean, yeah.
Guardian Heroes 2, not a Sega game, but geez. Guardian Heroes, one of the crown jewels of the Saturn. Would have been a brilliant to have seen something, a sequel to that on Dreamcast as well.
Just to add on to what you said, Tom, I think you're absolutely right with regards to these games again being sort of trapped on the Saturn, as it were. Every time a new mini console gets announced, I'm always like hopeful it's going to be a Saturn because, as I said, all jokes aside, it is a system that just kind of passed me by. I do own one now, but I never played one when it was contemporary. And there are so many amazing Saturn games. James mentioned Burning Rangers, which would have been one of mine. That was one of the few games that I actually was really like envious of not being able to play when it came out, because that was quite a late release as well, wasn't it, on the Saturn?
That's right.
But I remember that looked incredible, like really innovative and something different. And a Saturn Mini would be incredible with some of the games they could offer on there.
Yeah, it really would. But just to pick up on something you said, Tom, just around porting Mortal 2 games to the Dreamcast, and just improving Saturn ports, kind of like Nintendo do with the Switch compared to the Wii U. I mean, games like Sky Target's a great one, which it's not the best port on the Saturn, but it's decent fun. But we saw it once or twice. Obviously, we've got Dynamite Cop, which was a Model 2 port, which was a great port onto the Dreamcast. But I'd love to see a better port of Sky Target, a better port of the original House of the Dead, things like that. Maybe LA Machine Guns and what's the other one?
You'd think like a port of House of the Dead as well would have made so much sense given the lack of light gun games that were available. And, House of the Dead 2 was such a huge game. Again, massive in the arcades, massive appeal to people who wanted that, arcade experience at home, because, Dreamcast was really the first sort of console that offered you that it wasn't like for like, but for all intents and purposes, like for like experience. And, you've picked up House of the Dead 2, and there was nothing really to use your light gun with until like Confidential Mission and that sort of thing came out, unless you wanted to import Crimson X or whatever it was called, Death Crimson. So yeah, why not port over? Like, how Virtua Cop was released in America and Japan. Why not just put Virtua Cop and House of the Dead 1 on a disc together? Seems like no-brainers.
It really does. I think the original House of the Dead still held it had a great reputation back then. That I don't think anyone would have complained if it came to the Dreamcast in addition to the sequel. I think the Virtual Cop 2 port was good. I mean, could have had the first one as well. I mean, again, there's so many light gun games in the arcade that came from Sega. It felt almost
Lost World as well. That was the one I really wanted.
Oh, God, yeah, I think everyone really wanted Lost World. I think that's one of the ones that James and I featured on our Lost in the Arcade episode, because that was one that I was convinced was coming to the Dreamcast.
Yeah,
and it never did.
I can only assume it was looking a bit weathered, wasn't it, by that point? And I guess they wanted to make everything look shiny and amazing, like House of the Dead 2, and I guess it probably wasn't worth their licensing as well. Yeah.
100%. I think that played a big part. And I think that's why we don't get a lot of you see people on Twitter clamouring, going, bring back this one, bring back that one. But a lot of these games have got, like the Scud Race, for example, you've got like Golf, Ferrari, Dodge, all these brands that literally don't have the license, like Outrun 2. Bring back Outrun 2. They don't have the Ferrari license anymore. Because I'd love to see like this whole talk about Sega doing like a super game, and I'd have loved the super game to have been like a cloud-based arcade. I've spoke to Dan and mentioned this on previous episodes as well, where can you imagine, like, DLC is a big thing now, right? So you buy a base pack and it's your arcades, right? And you can buy a pack of games. So you start off with driving games, fighting games, or any kind of other genres, and you've got a kind of blank arcade that you start with, and you can place your machines wherever you want. You can then buy posters, memorabilia, decorate your arcade, buy machine packs. So you could buy the Fighting Vipers collection, the Virtua Fighter collection, the House of the Dead collection, put your arcade machines wherever you want, and then on your friends list you could invite friends to come to your arcade, play your games, go to their arcade, play their games. I just think there's so much potential for what they could do with all these franchises, but I think a lot of it is down to the fact that Sega just won't spend the money. They're very kind of risk averse now. Sega, they'll only release something if it's guaranteed to make money. They're not going to throw shit at the wall and see what sticks like they used to. But I just think that there's so much potential. I would love something like that, like a cloud-based arcade where you just basically, if you all went to the arcades in your teens, like most of us did, you used to love walking about. You didn't even need to play the machines. You just look at them and look at these cabinets, are amazing. And I think being able to do that, like that online museum thing or that Atari museum thing, something like that, I think would be absolutely brilliant. But
I used to go. I used to go down my arcade, which was a Mega Bowl, and I'd have £2 in my pocket, and I'd walk around for about 20 minutes trying to decide what to spend it on.
I've been there, mate. That's it. Mega Bowl, Christ. We all had a Mega Bowl, didn't we?
Yeah.
Still got one up here, just around the corner. Yeah,
that was where my House of the Dead obsession started. Mega Bowl. Then me and my mate used to play House of the Dead 2 all the time in there, and that was one of my fondest gaming memories. Was going to town to buy. We both bought House of the Dead 2 on Dreamcast, and then had two light guns in it in our living room. And at the time, it was just like, oh my god, this is amazing! And it doesn't cost us £1 to play it; it's just cost us like £60 each to buy the game instead.
At the risk of turning this into a "when I was a lad" type conversation,
Julie the Wolf.
A few months ago, earlier this year, I went off in search of an arcade machine. That there's a whole blog on the Dreamcast Junkyard blog about this game called Premier 11, which is an Atomic Wave football game. And somebody commented on my initial investigation into it, saying that he remembers playing it in an arcade in Portsmouth. Now, I live in Southampton, and I went to Portsmouth to see if I could find this arcade and see if I could find any remnants of where it might have been, or if anybody remembers seeing it. And I spoke to a couple of people in the arcade, and I spoke to one guy who was an arcade engineer, like an old wizened arcade engineer. I thought, he must have worked here like 20 years ago. Maybe he's got like some kind of words of wisdom about where it might be. He didn't. He just looked at me like I had four heads. But essentially what I'm trying to say is I went into an arcade and I was walking around and I was looking at all the games and I was just like, I don't recognise any of these. None of them have any kind of nostalgia for me. And I just feel quite sorry for like kids now going into an arcade, not having any kind of, there's no like magical feeling, because you can get the same experience at home quite easily, or even on a phone. It's not like seeing an arcade machine in an arcade, but then your computer games at home are crap. Do you know what I mean?
Tom, can I?
It was where you kind of got you get a glimpse of the future, though. Sorry, Jazz, on you go, mate.
No, it's good. I'm going to hijack the podcast very quickly, and I'm going to ask everyone a question, and you've got like literally 30 seconds to answer. You can have money is no object. You can have any two arcade machines in your house right now. What would they be?
I'll go first. I would have probably Daytona, like the big 10 cab one, the one that you can play against all your mates.
Yeah.
They
don't have to be Sega, by the way.
Probably not. Time Crisis.
Nice. Dan?
Yeah, I'd go for Outrun 2, the full size Ferrari cab, and I would probably have. It would have to be Street Fighter 4, I think. I've got every other version of it. I might as well get the arcade edition as well.
Nice. James?
Sega Rally and the original Virtua Fighter, but I would want the sit-down cabinet Virtua Fighter that I used to play in booths, the big giant projection screen with the big chair you used to sit in, that kind of bench you would kind of sugar your way into.
Yeah, the actual one, the actual machine as well. It has to be that actual machine.
I you go and find it in a scrapyard somewhere.
I was going to say Time Crisis, so I'll go House of the Dead 2, and my other one is Cruising World, but just that's because I got lots of fond memories of that horrible game.
And you ever go at me for like in Club Drive? Oh my god!
I love Cruising World. It's brilliant.
Right, guys. Right, we've spoken about Saturn games getting sequels on the Dreamcast. One game that did get a pseudo sequel on the Dreamcast is the Sega Worldwide Soccer franchise. Even though it's not really Sega Worldwide Soccer, it's World League Soccer. And I bring this up because you might not notice, but there's a little competition going on at the moment called what's it called? Or the World Cup? Yeah. So I listened to the one of the latest SEGAGuys podcasts, and it was absolutely brilliant. And it was all about it was like a World Cup reenacted on Sega hardware. Sega football games on Sega platforms played off against each other, and then Dan and James basically had a bit of a chat about which one they think was the better game and the reasons why. And I just thought it was fantastically entertaining, and I was on a train. There were several moments I laughed out loud, and a guy opposite me just like glared at me. Most of the time it was because of your fantastic impressions, James, of the various commentators in some of these long forgotten football games. Unlock these like long forgotten memories of like just how bad the commentary was. But yeah, I just thought it'd be really cool to get you on and actually chat with you about some of these games, because there are a lot of football games on Sega consoles. I don't want to spoil it for people who have not listened to the episode. Please do, if you're listening to this, go and find the SEGAGuys episodes about Sega football games, because it's definitely worth your time. But I just wanted to talk about some memories, really, of your favourite football games over the years. James, you were quite fond, I think, of Euro 96. So, yeah, and obviously being a Sega Saturn exclusive, I thought it might be a good place to start. So tell us why you liked Euro 96.
Well, I'll tell you something, Dan. It's Ali McCoist here. I'm just going to tell you why I love Euro 96 absolutely so much, is because, and I'll tell you something, it's absolutely sensational that I played in that tournament. And James was only 17 years old whenever I played in that tournament. And what a goal that I scored against Switzerland, by the way. Pretty much. It was it was a game that obviously came with the Saturn bundle that I got for Christmas 96. I got VF2, Sega Rally, Thunderhawk 2, Firestorm, and Euro 96. That was my bundle from Dixon's that I got for Christmas. But I mean, looking back at it now, I had a wee bit of fun playing through it. I won Euro 96 with Scotland. Yay! As if that was ever going to happen. Gary McAllister's still a dick. He's been assistant manager at Rangers and helped us win the league since then, but I still can't forgive him for missing that penalty. Honest to God, man.
Is that the one where Gascoigne scored straight after it?
Well, that's the thing. Like, Gaza had just finished his first full season in Scotland with Rangers, and then he decides to flick the ball over Colin Hendry's head and rattle it past the now sadly departed Andy Gorham, who passed away earlier this year. But I think it's what Dan and I were talking about on that kind of pod, is that a lot of these kind of football games at that time, like your Sensible Soccers, your FIFAs, your Euro 96s, your Worldwide Soccers, like, I think because we grew up in that kind of, and obviously you guys, you know, Dan and Jazz, you are kind of like late 30s heading into your 40s, so you're kind of similar era, but you kind of grew up in the kind of 90s football. And I think it was quite a kind of special time in football. The Premier League was just being kind of formed. Serie A was still the kind of biggest league in the world. Scottish football wasn't as mince as it is now. Money hadn't destroyed the game. We still had a fair crack at getting the best players. So there was still a bit of kind of magic and nostalgia about football back then. But Euro 96 is just, it's a reskin of Actua Soccer. With Barry Davis on commentary. Ali McCoist! Just the commentary, that's like the same kind of 6 or 7 lines, repeated over and over again kind of thing. But, at that point in time, whenever you had came from like a Sensible Soccer, like a FIFA International Soccer at that kind of point in time, and you were coming to Euro 96, it was quite kind of a jump. You were kind of taken aback, 3D stadiums, 3D players, actual people commentating, like people that you heard on like Match of the Day on a Saturday were actually on your telly commentating on what you did on the screen. So I had a lot of great fun with it back in the day, and I say it hasn't held up well at all with the kind of passing of time, but I still had a bit of fun, winning Euro 96 with Scotland.
I think the thing for me about that particular game is that it was a big tournament happening in England, and it came out on the Saturn and not any of the other systems.
Well, see, if you look on YouTube and you look at kind of highlights of games, you can actually see at Wembley there was people with big foam fingers, like the big foam hands, and it had like the Sega Saturn logo on it. So that I don't know if they were handing these out at games or whatever they were doing, but I don't know. Of all the exclusive deals that Sega tried to make at that time, they for whatever reason, done one for Euro 96. So
yeah, it's really interesting. I'd like to know how that came about and why it was particularly the Saturn that was chosen. Maybe Sega basically threw money at it and said, put it on our system because then it'll be an exclusive for us. And then people will be like, oh, I like football. Euro 96 is happening, I'll buy a Saturn. My first taste of football on the Saturn would have been International Victory Goal. Which is a sprite-based football game, and the players had this kind of almost like this plastic kind of sheen to them, and I just remember that it looked a little bit like Toy Story, and I was like, oh wow, this is the future. And then when we moved on to like polygonal games like Sega Worldwide Soccer 97, FIFA 97, that's when they kind of became fully 3D. I know you talk at great length on your podcast episode about the Sega Worldwide Soccer series, but there's a long and storied kind of history of football on Sega systems. And again, you talk a lot about the Sensible Soccer series and the original FIFA on the pod. Dan, I mean, I'd like to bring you in on this conversation as well, because I know that you are a big football fan. Again, what are your kind of thoughts and memories of a particular football game on a Sega console?
I mean, I've always wanted to play football games. I mean, the first game that I got on my Commodore 64 was International Soccer, which I thought was amazing at the time. Mm-hmm. And then I moved on to World Cup Italia '90. I mean, that was another Sega exclusive. That they got the rights to the tournament for, which is funny how that compares to Euro '96. But if I'm talking about I got FIFA after that. But if I'm talking about my favourite, and it's kind of spoilers for the World Cup show, but Sega Worldwide Soccer '97 really is my favourite for a lot of reasons. Now, when I got my Sega Saturn in 1996, so I got it in November with birthday money and pocket money, etc. And when it came to Christmas 1996, I asked for Virtua Cop 2 on a Sega Saturn. My little brother, seemingly some sort of revenge for me getting Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on his Master System for my birthday, he got Sega Worldwide Soccer 97 for my Saturn. And it was kind of going from FIFA 96 that we had on the Mega Drive the year before to that was just such an enormous leap. And I think sometimes it's easy to look back now and say, well, this game wasn't impressive or whatever. And I know Sega Worldwide Soccer 97 was impressive for the time, but when you compare the fact that just 2 or 3 years earlier, we were, fully sprite-based games, even as you say, International Victory Goal was largely a sprite-based game. Going to these fully polygonal, huge stadiums, fully 3D players, you swish the camera around. It was absolutely mind-blowing at the time. But Sega Worldwide Soccer, I think everything about it just felt right to me from the intro, which I've come to find out that the Japanese intro is even better with its crazy English lyrics. From the intro to the music to the gameplay, I think there was a rumor or there was something that I read back in the day that Sega Worldwide Soccer 97 or Victory Goal 96, which was the game that it was ported from, was actually the inspiration for International Superstar Soccer 64 and ISS Pro on the PS1. So if that's true, then the lineage of that game and the influence that it's had is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, that is a very interesting little factoid. That one of my biggest kind of bugbears, and you did mention this on your pod, is that the Dreamcast continuation of the Sega Worldwide Soccer license basically was essentially a reskin of World League Soccer from Silicon Knights. And again, I don't want to spoil your pod, but James, your recollection of your first interaction with that game was very similar to mine. I saw it in the shop and I thought, oh my God, Sega Worldwide Soccer is now on the Dreamcast. I remember this on the Saturn. It was unbelievably good. I'm going to get it. And then I put it on and I was like, this is World League Soccer. What's going on here? Like, what's happened? So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could ever forgive Sega for that, sort of farming out the Worldwide Soccer license to Silicon Dreams.
At least it makes talking about football games on Sega consoles easy because you can just discount the Dreamcast library altogether, given the pretty shocking representation of football we had on the Dreamcast when you think about it. I
mean, you say that, but I mean, I wrote an article on the Dreamcast Junkyard blog just very recently about the differences between 90 Minutes Sega Championship Soccer or Sega Championship Football, which was the last football game released on the Dreamcast, and the Japanese version, which is called J-League Spectacle Soccer, which completely overhauls the utterly horrendous PAL version and almost does play like a Konami football game. And it kind of it goes back full circle almost to what Dan was saying about how Sega Worldwide Soccer influenced PES or Pro Evo as it was known then, or whatever it was called, ISS, which then influenced, in my opinion, J-League Spectacle Soccer, which was the last football game on the Dreamcast. Yeah. It's even got Konami advertising boards around the outside of the pitch. So
it was just I think that was the problem, is there was so many mediocre, or not so many, but almost every football game that came out on Dreamcast was just so like, is this going to be the one? No, it's like, okay, but it's not great. And, it was kind of like, you've just stopped playing ISS Pro Evo or Pro Evo 98 for this, and you can't get a football game that comes anywhere near it, which was just the biggest disappointment, I think, for me as a Dreamcast owner at the time.
I did enjoy your chat, Dan and James, on the SEGAGuys podcast about Virtua Striker 2, and I think you were spot on with what you said about it, and you did mention an article that you'd read where it said that Virtua Striker 2 isn't a football game, it's a fighting game. And so if you just elaborate on that a little bit, because I think it was spot on, to be honest.
Yeah, it was a review that I read back in the day, and I think they gave Virtua Striker 2 something like 3 or 4 out of 10. They lambasted it, and they said Virtua Striker 2 isn't a football game. It's a scrolling beat 'em up where the goalkeepers are bosses, and I do get that sense from it because it's extremely chunky to play. And I think me and James went into it a little bit because we both have a similar feeling in that a lot of games from that era, a lot of football games from that era, and worldwide soccer kind of comes under that umbrella. And modern football games, if you're talking your FIFA 23s and your eFootball, whatever the Konami one is these days, they all, you can, pass it to a player, and before the ball has landed at their feet, you can already start thinking about your next move, and you can hold down the pass button or hold down the shoot button, and you can play from there. Whereas Virtua Striker 2, you kind of have to be very reactive. You can't pre-press your buttons, so that at least that's what it feels like. You have to wait until the ball's at your feet before doing the next move, and because it feels so reactive like that, I think it's quite jarring. I remember when I was playing it, in preparation for that episode, I was thinking, "Oh, this is such a chore to play," and then all of a sudden it clicked. And I was having the time of my life. And I actually think it's a fantastic football game, but it's just so different to everything else out there. I mean, that game was number 1 in the arcades in Japan for a couple of years. And I was thinking to myself, why was it so popular? But then when it clicks and you kind of you get into the rhythm of it and understand how it feels and how it plays, there was that review that lambasted it. But then CMVG gave it 5 out of 5, gave it its highest score that it could give. So there's definitely a charm about it. It's just very different to what everything else that's out there.
Yeah, I think I need to go back to it and give it, the time that it deserves. Just literally just on the back of your chat, because it never really clicked for me. So if it can click eventually, then I need to give it more time, I think. Yeah,
I mean it's one of these things where I was kind of hating it for a bit, and then I got a rainbow goal, and then I was absolutely and James is already talking about earlier that he's trying to beat Sega FC on there, and it's become his latest obsession for him. And I think that again, that speaks volumes about the appeal of it. But it's just because it's so different. I think that's what puts most people off. It certainly put me off initially.
I think using the D-pad is a real mind over matter thing as well. That really puts me off every time I load it up to play it. Just having to use the D-pad it just doesn't feel natural at all for a game like that. But I agree. I think the best reviews I've read of it have been the ones that say it's not a good football game, but it's a good, whatever they describe it as game, because it isn't a football game traditionally. And yeah, it just needs to be played accordingly.
Yeah, even the setup of it is different because you have to, if you play it on the arcade mode, you don't get your traditional 2 halves, do you? You get,
or cards or anything.
Yeah,
snapping people from behind.
Yeah. Do you know what? One of my funniest memories of playing on an arcade machine was Virtua Striker 2. I think it was 2. It might have been the first one, but I think it was 2. It was in an airport, and we were delayed, and me and my best mate were playing it, and I was player 1, I think, and the only button that would work apart from the joystick was long pass, and I managed to beat him 1-0 by just using long pass, and it's to this day it's my best arcade gaming achievement, I think. And I got slaughtered 3-0 by Brazil in the next round, I think.
I just love the wee intro on that as well, when it talks you through the actual the kind of controls.
Controls, yeah.
Short pass. Long pass. Accumulate the power. Shoot.
That's the hallmark of a classic Sega game is how good is the announcer on it.
I was just going to say, it's like Virtua Striker 2's in the room with us.
It does also get bonus points, of course, for the stupidest subtitle game on the Dreamcast. So you can't knock anything away from Ver.2000.1.
Yeah.
Virtua Striker 2 version 2000.1.
So I'm going to add some reverb to that in the edit and see if it can. I've got a similar story before we move on up to Jazz's story about the arcade. I remember when I got my Sega Saturn, I got the bundle that had the 6 games. It had Sega Worldwide Soccer 97, Firestorm, Loaded, Sega Rally. I think it had Alien Trilogy and Virtua Fighter 2. I think it was, and it was meant to come with 2 controllers, but it only came with 1. And it also had the steering wheel. So me and my brother would play 2-player games. One of us had to have the steering wheel, and the other had to have the controller. So we would play Sega Worldwide Soccer with. I can remember Christmas Day trying to play it with the steering wheel.
It's like Rocket League before Rocket League was even cool.
Ridiculous. Oh, that's brilliant. I love. There's so many football games on Sega consoles, and there's terrible ones and there's amazing ones. But I do honestly, if you listen to this podcast, you obviously have an interest in Sega. If you also have an interest in football games, please go and listen to that episode. We will link it in the show notes, as we will with everything that SEGAGuys have done. So please do check that out. One final question about football before we move on to an actual quiz is who do you think will win the World Cup? Obviously, this will come out before the World Cup has been won, so it's all speculation. So let's just go around the room very quickly. Jazz, who do you think is going to win the World Cup?
I think Spain at this point.
Dan?
Despite the result today, as of this recording, I still think it's hard to look past France winning it, which I think if England make it through their next round, I think that they'll meet France in the quarters, and I think that's where England's journey will end. So France for me, I think. Interesting.
James?
Yeah, that's me linking in with my Sega brother on that hive mind again. For the games I've watched so far, I think France are the team to beat.
Interesting. I am going to go... I'm not going to say Wales, which I'm probably thinking Jazz was thinking I was going to say. I'm going to go for the outsiders. I'm going to go for Netherlands, just because I really like what I've seen from their matches so far. So yeah,
Tom likes your sexy football.
Oh yes, Total Football. Yeah. Which was also a game on the Mega Drive, wasn't it? Total Football, was it? Can't remember. Anyway, quiz time. Quiz. We have a quiz for the SEGAGuys. It's the SEGAGuys quiz.
No pressure.
Put loads of thought and effort into that title, as you can probably tell. So the way we'll do this is we'll alternate asking the questions. I did send Jazz the questions. He's going to tell me now if he hasn't got them. Have you got them, Jazz?
Oh, they were shit, mate. I've written a whole load of new ones for you.
Thanks. Cheers, mate. But so we've got 10 questions. We're going to start fairly sort of easy, and then they get a little bit trickier. These might be easy for you guys. I don't know. You are the SEGAGuys after all, so we'll see. So, if you're ready, we shall begin. You can confer, and as I say, it's 10 questions, and so let's begin. So I'll ask the first question. Question number 1: Sega is a portmanteau of which 2 words?
Service games.
Correct.
I'm expecting you to put some nice sound effects around these.
There'll always be sound effects.
You need to add drama like KC does on the Sega Lounge, but
I'm expecting an equally fast answer to this one, James, from you. On what date did the Dreamcast launch in Japan?
It'll be 27th of November 1998.
Very good.
Very good indeed. These guys know their Sega. Okay. Name the fictional technique the Mega Drive used to render graphics at speeds other consoles could only dream of.
Go on, Dan.
That would be blast processing.
Correct.
Such a good era of adverts, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was.
Sega!
The Cyber Razor Cut. Who was the head of Sega Europe when the Dreamcast launched?
Oh, Sega Europe.
We trip you up with a blue swirl question.
well, Bernie was obviously Sega of America at the time, but who was? Oh, it's annoying.
I'm sorry, mate. I've got no idea. I was fully wrapped up in my orange swirl Nirvana at the time.
No, I'm trying to...
It was Jean-Francois, is it Cécilion, Tom?
Cécilon, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, it's a tough one, that. Tough one. It'll probably get easier now after that. Okay, so next question. Which root vegetable is the VMU CPU named after?
Oh, what?
Would you like me to repeat the question, James?
Aye, go for it, mate.
Yeah. Okay. Which root vegetable is the VMU CPU code named after? I must add, you can't Google anything on here.
No. I've got honour.
Mate, where are you going to find the answer to that in Google? How would you even think about putting that in? Dear Google, what root vegetable is... Just come back and stick your finger up at you like that. Right, root vegetable. We'll just need to pick one down and go with it.
Yeah, go for
it. All I can think of is maybe radish. Well, you make go with radish.
Aye, go for it, mate.
Going radish. Okay, it's the potato.
I mean, it's stupidly easy now, isn't it? Really, I mean,
so it's easy when you know the answers, as they always say.
The visual memory totty.
All right. Alleged criminal Uji Naka is a co-creator of Sonic. Can you name one of the other two creators?
Alleged criminal.
Alleged is the key word here. We have to keep it, above board.
Naoto Oshima?
Yes, correct.
Yep, got it.
I played that.
Mine was going blank for a second. Then it was Oshima that he scribbled out in the.
The picture of the Knights team. That's so childish, wasn't it? Honestly.
What was that? What's the story there?
There was a picture that someone put up, and it was the Knights team. And before he put it on Twitter, he literally took like a black marker pen and scrubbed Oshima's face out.
You can literally see where he scribbled it out with like a digital pen.
It's so childish.
Because they'd fallen out over Balan Wonderworld.
Oh my god! Well, to be fair, I mean, I think you'd fall out with anyone over Balan Wonderworld, wouldn't you? Let's be honest. Didn't you buy that, Jazz?
No, we had that conversation. It was a $5, and even that I thought, nah.
I bought it for a £10. And I do want to play it, but it's in my backlog and promoting it through, other games. Like I've not got to that point yet, so it's still in the cellophane upstairs.
You've got a few Tiger handhelds you've got to go to before you get to that. The yellow Sonic watch, the Tiger Sonic watch. God, I remember having that.
Yeah, a couple of games on the lock-on.
Next question is: Virtua Hamster is a cancelled game for which Sega platform?
Virtua Hamster.
This is real, by the way. This is true.
I thought it was one of your CVG April Fools again.
No. This is real.
I was reading about it the other day as well. Is it the 32X?
It is. It is indeed. Yes. Well done.
Correct. My head's just spinning now. The R-Zone with all the Sega spin-offs they put on there, like Virtua Fighter. Virtua Fighter on the R-Zone. What else is there? Daytona. There was a Virtua Cop as well, wasn't there?
I think there was.
Was that the thing you put on your head?
Yeah. There was a Virtua Fighter LCD game on there. It was horrendous.
Oh my god, that must have been horrendous. Yeah, and I was thinking that the Sega ports on the Gamecom would
Gamecom. I was watching a Sonic Jam playthrough on there recently, and I was thinking it can't be that bad, and oh god, it is. It's.
All right, question number 8 then. The Mega CD's main CPU is a Motorola 68000. What is its clock speed in megahertz?
I've got two numbers in my head, 17 and 24. They could both be wrong.
Is that your answer? One of those?
It's a Motorola CPU it's got, isn't it?
Yeah, 68,000.
Is that the same as the Amiga?
Same as the Amiga and the Mega Drive.
So what's 12?
It's close, but I'm not going to give it to you. It's 12 and a half.
Geese piece.
Which makes it 5 faster than the Mega Drive CPU.
Okay, question number 9. The final official game for the Sega Saturn was released in March 2000. What was it?
Final Fight Revenge.
Yes, it was. Well done.
Good knowledge. Good knowledge. Name any one. This is the final question. Name any one of the 3 American businessmen who founded Service Games in 1946.
Hold on, let me think. David Rosen?
Yes, Rosen, that was the one I was thinking of.
It's not one of the answers I've got, so unless Tom's put it down wrong.
No, this is completely correct. The three businessmen are Martin Bromley, Irving Bromberg, and James Humpert.
Well done, though, guys. That was really impressive.
Let me see. Let's count how many you got. You got Sega is a portmanteau of which 2 words? You got that one. You got which day the Dreamcast launched in Japan. You got that. You got Blast Processing. You didn't get Jeff Cessalon. You didn't get the Root Vegetable. You did get Alleged Criminal Eugene Acker is called Sick. So you got 5 out of 10. So yeah, good 50% there. That's
halfway there.
Yeah.
What was the documentary I'm watching? David Rosen was mentioned. Who's David Rosen?
If there is a steward's inquiry into this answer, I'm sure people will let us know, and I will take full responsibility. But
it's like that episode of Only Fools and Horses, isn't it? Whenever I was sure it was Ravel.
I'm never going to live this down, am I? It's going to be on my gravestone, David Rosen, even though it's me in the grave. A quick edit here from Tom in the future as I'm actually editing this podcast. They actually got 6 out of 10, so apologies to the Sega guys. You actually did get more than 5 right. Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the pod. I'm a fan of your pod, and so I would like for you to tell people where they can find more of what you do on the internet, and where they can find you on Twitter, YouTube, that kind of thing. So yeah, please tell everybody listening who you are and where they can find you.
Yeah, so we are on Radio Sega, new episode every fortnight, 6 p.m. on Monday. Then our podcast will go out to anywhere where you get your podcasts. Just look for the Sega Guys. We're also on YouTube, the video versions of our podcast, which we've just started doing just a few weeks ago. They go up, Tuesday morning after the Radio Sega episode. So yeah, look for the Sega Guys on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at swooper_D. James is at the SEGAHolic, and the podcast account is at SEGAGuys. I think that covers it all, doesn't it, James?
That's just I just basically sat back, mate, because that's your podcast outro. So you just literally need to do your outro for every week and that's you sorted, mate. So,
I know.
And then usually at that point, I just finish and go, Sega! And that's us done. So,
So if any of that's wrong, we've been doing it wrong for the last 3 years. So,
to be honest, mate, we never have an outro on the DreamPod. I just kind of wing it, But yeah, you can find us as a collective on the internet at the dreamcastjunkyard.co.uk. You can find us on Twitter at the DC Junkyard. You can find us on Discord. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us obviously listening to this podcast. So you must have got it somewhere, unless somebody just gave you a dodgy sort of tape, down the back alley somewhere. Jaz, where can you be found on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at AgileHarvey. And I just want to echo what you said, Tom. It's great to have you guys on. Love the content that you all put out, even though we will agree to disagree on the best colour swirl to be seen on the front of a Dreamcast console.
Yeah, and what only just remains for me to say, thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in, wherever you listen. And we will be back soon with another episode of the DreamPod. But for now, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again next time.
Please stop this disc now.
The DreamPad, that sounds like some dodgy Chinese version, like the Dreamcast, DreamPad.
Sega's version of what's that Ubisoft thing with the draw pad on there? U-Draw.
God, I remember them selling those off for literally pence on the pound because literally nobody was buying them. Yeah,
I thought you were going to say then, Dan. I thought you were going to say it sounds like some kind of weird YouTuber sex house the DreamPod.
Maybe it is.